I remember the time when everything around me seemed to be collapsing. I had lost the sense of direction, and the world appeared unkind, indifferent to my efforts and dreams. In those days, I would sit quietly, wondering how some people managed to live with such grace and ease, while others struggled to breathe under the weight of their circumstances. I was convinced that life dealt cards by chance. But then, I met a man who shifted the axis of my understanding. He didn't lecture me in grand terms, nor did he try to impress me with philosophy. He simply spoke as one who knew, as one who had seen behind the curtain of what we call reality. He told me that everything I experience is not happening to me, but through me. Those words rested in my mind like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. I had heard about the law of attraction before, but it always sounded like wishful thinking wrapped in pretty words. He spoke differently. He told me that imagination is not daydreaming. It is creation itself. He said, if you would change your world, begin by changing the image within you. For nothing appears in your outer world that was not first conceived in the silence of your mind. I didn't quite understand it then. I thought he was speaking in riddles, yet something within me felt the truth of it. I began to test it in small ways. I imagined receiving a letter from a friend I had not heard from in years. I imagined the tone of his voice, the handwriting, the way the envelope felt in my hands. I did this not with effort, but with ease, as though it had already happened. And a few days later, the letter came. I stood there, holding it, half in awe, half in disbelief, realizing that I had somehow drawn this experience to myself. That was the beginning of my journey into understanding the law that governs every aspect of our lives. The man told me, do not try to make it happen. Assume it has already happened. Those words challenged everything I believed about effort and struggle. I was raised to think that life rewards the hardest worker, that sweat and sacrifice were the currency of success. Yet here was a man telling me that effort without belief is wasted energy, that one's assumption determines one's reality. He said, you can toil for a lifetime and remain in the same place if you continue to assume yourself to be what you do not wish to be. That struck me deeply. I began to see how often I had been my own obstacle, how often I had spoken of what I lacked rather than what I desired. There was one night when I could not sleep. I sat in darkness, thinking of all the things that seemed missing from my life. Then I remembered what he had said. You are the operant power. It is not the world that must change first. It is you. I decided in that moment to imagine myself as already having all that I desired. I closed my eyes and felt what it would be like if everything I longed for were already true. The feeling was subtle at first, then stronger, until I could almost touch it. I fell asleep that night not as the man I thought I was, but as the one I wished to be. When I woke, the outer world looked the same, but something had shifted within me. I carried a quiet confidence, an assurance that the unseen was working in my favor. And slowly, circumstances began to move. The law of attraction is not about forcing the world to obey your will. It is about aligning yourself with what you truly desire. The outer world reflects the inner. You cannot receive wealth while clinging to thoughts of lack. You cannot experience love while seeing yourself as unworthy of it. The man told me, your world is a mirror showing you the state of your inner consciousness. Change the image within, and the reflection must follow. These words were simple, yet they contained the secret to life itself. I began to observe my thoughts, realizing how often I entertained ideas of doubt, fear, and unworthiness. I had planted those seeds unconsciously, and my life had borne their fruit. Now I began to sow deliberately. Each thought became a seed, and I chose them with care. Many nights I would sit quietly before sleep and imagine my life as I wished it to be. Not hoping for it, not begging for it, but living in that feeling as though it were already true. I imagined speaking to friends about my success, feeling the joy of fulfillment, sensing the gratitude of having already received what I desired. Sometimes doubt would creep in. The senses would whisper, nothing has changed. But I learned to ignore that voice. I reminded myself that the invisible precedes the visible, Just as a seed must first take root in darkness before sprouting into the light, so must our desires be accepted in imagination before they can manifest in the world. Faith, I discovered, is the substance of that unseen reality. There came a point when I realized the power was not in the words I spoke, but in the feeling behind them. You can affirm endlessly, but if your heart denies what your lips proclaim, nothing changes. It is feeling that impresses the subconscious. The man often said, "Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and walk as though it were already so." I tested it again and again. I imagined being in a new home, feeling the key in my hand, seeing myself walking through the door. I did this until it felt natural. Then I let it go, trusting the law to work. Weeks later, an opportunity appeared unexpectedly. What had seemed impossible now unfolded with ease. That was when I truly understood. Imagination creates reality. So many people misunderstand this law. They think it means sitting idly and waiting for miracles. But it is not about idle wishing. It is about disciplined imagination. The world responds to the assumptions you hold most firmly. If you assume failure, it will appear. If you assume success, the doors will open. The universe is impartial. It gives you not what you want, but what you believe yourself to have. When I first grasped this, I felt both liberated and responsible. No longer could I blame others for my condition. The power was mine all along, though I had used it unconsciously. Every complaint, every fear, every idle worry had been an affirmation of lack. Now I chose to use the same power deliberately, in harmony with what I desired. In time, I learned that imagination is not separate from God. It is God expressing itself through the human mind. When the ancient text says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he," it speaks of this very principle. The heart, in Scripture, means the subconscious, the creative depth of our being. Whatever idea you impress upon it with feeling and conviction, it must express. Life cannot deny itself. It only reflects what you accept as true. The man told me, "Stop trying to make things happen. Live in the end, and let the law bring it to pass." I practice this daily. Sometimes I faltered. Sometimes I doubted. But each time I returned to the state of knowing that imagination creates reality. And each time the world reshaped itself to match my inner assumption. Looking back, I see how simple it truly is, yet how easily the mind complicates it. We are conditioned to look outward for answers, to believe that power lies somewhere beyond our reach. But the secret was never hidden. It is within every man and woman waiting to be awakened. The law of attraction is not a tool for greed or vanity. It is a reminder of our creative nature. It teaches that thought and feeling combined form the blueprint of experience. You are never a victim of circumstance unless you believe yourself to be. The outer world may seem fixed, but it bends quietly to the authority of your inner conviction. Change your concept of self, and the world must change with it. That was the first lesson the man gave me, and it changed the course of my life. I began to walk differently, to speak differently, to think differently. No longer did I beg life to be kind. I assumed it already was. I no longer asked for opportunities. I imagined myself already standing where I wished to be. The more I lived in that feeling, the more the outer world rearranged itself in perfect order. It was not magic. It was law. The law of attraction is simply the operation of imagination, faith, and feeling working together in harmony. And once you know this, you can never again say that life happens by chance. You will know, as I came to know, that everything unfolds from within. There came a time when I began to truly practice what I had learned. Not as a student testing a theory, but as one who knows the law is certain. I realized that the law of attraction was not some occasional power to be used in moments of need. It was the constant activity of imagination shaping the world around me. Every thought, every emotion, every assumption was molding my experience, whether I knew it or not. The man had once told me, "You are always creating. The question is not whether you create, but what you create." Those words stayed with me. I began to watch my inner conversations carefully. Whenever I caught myself speaking lack or fear within, I stopped and replaced those words with the truth I wished to live. I would say quietly to myself, I am secure. I am loved. I am successful, not as idle affirmations, but as declarations of being. It was not about repeating words, but about assuming the feeling of already being what I desired to be. At first, my old thoughts would return with great persistence. Doubt has a way of testing the strength of faith. There were days when nothing seemed to move, when the evidence before my eyes contradicted everything I was imagining. Yet I remembered what I had been told. Do not concern yourself with appearances. They are but shadows of an old belief. I would take a deep breath, close my eyes, and step again into the inner world where all things begin. There I would imagine the scene that implied my desire had already been fulfilled. Sometimes I would imagine receiving a message of good news. Sometimes I would picture myself living in the state I wanted to experience. I would do this until it felt natural, until my heart accepted it as true. Then I would go about my day, not worrying about how it would happen. That part was never mine to decide. The man often said, imagination and faith are the secrets of creation. He made it clear that faith is not hope, nor is it idle belief. Faith is loyalty to the unseen reality. It is the quiet knowing that what you have assumed to be true will, in time, harden into fact. He once told me, you plant the seed in imagination, and your faith waters it. The harvest comes in its own season, not when you are impatient for it. That lesson changed everything for me. I stopped looking at the clock, stopped counting the days. Instead, I focused on maintaining the feeling of already having received. The world may take time to rearrange itself, but imagination works instantly. The delay is only the time required for your inner conviction to reach the level of certainty where no doubt remains. I remember vividly one instance when I desired to change my living situation. My room was small, cold, and dimly lit. I used to complain about it constantly, thinking that if only I could move to a better place, my life would improve. But the man reminded me, you cannot leave a state by fighting it. You must rise above it in consciousness. So, instead of lamenting where I was, I began to imagine myself in a warm, beautiful home filled with light. I walked through it in my mind as though it were real, touching the walls, hearing the sound of my footsteps on the floor, seeing the sunlight streaming through the windows. I did this every night before sleep. Within weeks, an opportunity came from a friend who was moving abroad. He offered me his home for a price that seemed almost impossible. It was not luck. It was law. The outer world had conformed to the image I had consistently held within. That experience taught me that persistence is the key to mastery. Many people test the law for a day or two and then give up, saying it doesn't work. But the law is not at fault. Their faith is faint. Imagination responds to the sustained feeling of belief. You cannot plant a seed and dig it up each morning to see if it has grown. You must trust the process. The unseen roots are forming even when you cannot see them. In the same way, your desires are taking shape beneath the surface of what you call reality. Hold firm to your assumption. Let the evidence of your senses contradict you if it must. The world of senses shows what you previously believed, not what you now accept. To change your future, you must remain loyal to the invisible vision within you. There were moments when I would be tempted to fall back into old thinking, to let fear or frustration take hold. Each time I reminded myself that every reaction was a seed. If I reacted in anger, I would harvest more of it. If I reacted in faith, I would see its fruit. I began to choose my inner reactions carefully, guarding them as one guards a precious treasure. It was not easy in the beginning. The habit of worry is a strong one, yet as I persisted it became easier. I found a strange peace in trusting the unseen. When the mind is fixed on the end, the middle no longer troubles you. You stop asking, how will it happen, and begin to rest in the assurance that it is happening. One evening, as I was walking home, I met a man who had heard me speak about imagination. He told me he had tried it, but it didn't work. I asked him what he had done. He said he had imagined receiving a promotion at his job, but weeks had passed and nothing changed. I asked him how he felt during those weeks. He admitted that each morning he would wake up expecting disappointment, and each evening he would confirm it by saying, "It still hasn't happened." I smiled and told him, "You have been faithful, but faithful to the wrong assumption." He looked at me puzzled, and I explained, "You imagined once but lived every day as though it were untrue. The law does not respond to what you do occasionally. It responds to what you are in consciousness all the time." He nodded slowly, realizing his mistake. I told him to imagine again, but this time to live in that assumption, to think, speak, and act as though it were already his. A month later, he returned to tell me that he had not only received the promotion, but also a raise beyond expectation. That is the way the law works, quietly, faithfully, and without struggle. The power of this law lies not in doing, but in being. You cannot attract what you are not conscious of being. If you wish to attract abundance, you must first assume the feeling of abundance. If you desire love, you must become love in consciousness. The outer conditions will always mirror your inner state. You cannot cheat this law. It is exact and impartial. It does not favor one person over another, for it resides within all equally. The difference lies in awareness. Some use it consciously while others use it unconsciously. Yet both are governed by the same principle. Assumption creates reality. Over time, I learned that the key is not effort, but naturalness. When a state feels natural, it begins to express effortlessly. The man told me, "Do not force yourself to believe. Simply relax into the feeling until it feels familiar." I found this to be true. When I forced myself to affirm what I did not yet feel, it created tension. But when I gently assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, it became easy. Imagination is not a battle. It is surrender. You surrender to the vision of what you desire until it possesses you completely. Then the outer world rearranges itself without your struggle. That is why the scriptures say, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is the key. In quiet imagination, all creation begins. Faith, I realized, is not something you try to have. It is something you grow into through experience. Each time you apply the law and see the results, your faith deepens. You begin to know, not merely believe, that imagination creates reality. That knowing becomes your strength in difficult times. When appearances seem against you, you stand firm, remembering that the same power that brought previous desires to life will bring this one as well. It is the same law, operating in the same way. The only variable is your faithfulness to it. The man said, "You will always receive according to your belief, not your words. Not your wishes, but your belief." That truth is as unchanging as gravity. Looking back, I see that every challenge I faced was an invitation to apply the law. Each difficulty was an opportunity to test my faith and to prove that imagination truly governs reality. And every time I persisted, I was rewarded. Not always in the way I expected, but always in harmony with the feeling I had assumed. The universe has a wisdom beyond our reasoning. It arranges the means in ways we cannot predict. Our only task is to maintain the end, to live as though it were already accomplished, and let the unseen intelligence handle the rest. As the months passed, I noticed that my life began to flow with greater ease. Opportunities came unbidden. People appeared at the right moments, and situations that once seemed fixed began to shift effortlessly. I no longer felt the old anxiety that used to haunt me. I had found peace in knowing that life responds faithfully to my inner state. The law of attraction, I realized, is not something to practice occasionally, but a way of living. It is the recognition that thought, feeling, and assumption are the creative forces behind all things. When you align them, your world reflects that harmony. When they are divided, your world mirrors that division. The choice is always yours. And so I learned that persistence is not about straining or forcing. It is about remaining loyal to your inner vision regardless of outer appearances. It is quiet determination, not restless struggle. It is faith in motion, walking unseen paths with certainty that they lead to fulfillment. When you master that, the world yields to you, for imagination, sustained and believed in, becomes fact. That is the promise of the law, and it never fails. As I continued to live by this law, I began to see that all of life rests upon one single foundation: the concept we hold of ourselves. The outer world mirrors not what we wish to be, but what we believe ourselves to be. Every event, every encounter, every condition arises from that inner assumption. You cannot permanently rise above the image you hold of yourself, nor can you experience anything that does not align with that image. The man once told me, "You do not attract what you want. You attract who you are." Those words echoed through my mind like a quiet revelation. I began to notice that the people I met, the opportunities that appeared, even the difficulties I faced, all of them were reflections of the idea I had accepted as myself. If I saw myself as small, life arranged itself to confirm it. When I dared to see myself as capable, worthy, and blessed, life reshaped accordingly. I remember one particular season when this truth was made clear to me. I had fallen into a sense of limitation. My finances were strained, my work uncertain, and my confidence weakened. I thought that by merely imagining wealth it would appear. But I was missing the key. The man reminded me, "You cannot attract abundance while feeling unworthy of it. You must first become the person who naturally lives in that state." I pondered those words deeply. I realized that I had been approaching the law as a beggar asking for favors rather than as a creator assuming authority. I saw that I had been imagining for something rather than imagining from it. To imagine for is to stand outside the desired state, hoping to enter. To imagine from is to be within it already, living in the end with complete faith. That was the turning point. That night, I decided to change my inner self-image completely. I sat quietly, closed my eyes, and imagined myself as a man of abundance, not merely in possessions, but in confidence, peace, and generosity. I saw myself walking with calm assurance, speaking with ease, giving freely without concern. I imagined receiving letters of appreciation, invitations, and new opportunities. Most of all, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that all my needs were met. I remained in that feeling until it felt real, until I could no longer tell whether it was imagination or memory. Then I slept in that consciousness, not as one hoping for a change, but as one who was changed. From that night forward, subtle shifts began to occur. I found myself making decisions from a place of confidence rather than fear. People who had once overlooked me began to treat me differently. Opportunities appeared where before there had been none. It was as though the entire world had awakened to a new version of me. The change did not come from effort or external struggle, it came from identity. I had altered the concept of self, and the world could do nothing but reflect it. The man had said, "There is no one to change but self." At first that seemed too simple, too small a statement to hold such power, but as I tested it, I discovered its truth. Every attempt to fix the outer world without changing the inner self was futile. It was like trying to change the reflection in a mirror without altering the face before it. Once I accepted the new concept of self, the reflection changed effortlessly. The law of attraction was not something separate from me. It was my own consciousness responding faithfully to my assumption of being. Many people struggle with this idea because they identify too deeply with their past. They carry their memories like chains, believing that what has been must determine what will be. But the law does not recognize the past. It only responds to the present assumption. What you believe yourself to be now is all that matters. You could have failed yesterday and still succeed today if you assume success now. You could have been poor all your life, yet become wealthy by changing the inner belief of poverty into the feeling of abundance. The law is not bound by time. It moves in the eternal now. That is why it is said, "Now is the accepted time." The moment you claim your new identity and imagination, you set creation in motion. The world will, in due season, conform to that claim. There was a woman who once came to me, troubled by her constant experiences of rejection. She said that no matter what she did, people overlooked her. Relationships ended the same way, and she felt invisible in her own world. I asked her what she thought of herself. She hesitated, then said, "I suppose I feel unworthy, as though I'm never enough." I told her gently, "That feeling is your prayer. You are continually affirming that state, and life can only echo it. You must assume a new concept of self, one who is loved, seen, and valued. Do not try to change the people around you. Change the way you see yourself, and they will change automatically. She agreed to try. For the next month, she imagined herself walking into a room and being warmly received. She imagined hearing words of appreciation, feeling a deep sense of belonging. She persisted each night before sleep until that feeling became natural. When she returned, her face was glowing. She said, "Everything has changed. People are kinder. I've even been offered a new position at work." I told her, "The world didn't change. You did. That is how the law works. It reflects faithfully the image you hold within." As I observed more of these transformations, I realized that the law of attraction is inseparable from the law of identity. What you assume yourself to be determines what you attract. The outer conditions are merely shadows cast by the inner light of self-concept. If you change the inner concept, the shadows rearrange themselves accordingly. This understanding brought me great peace. I no longer fought against life or tried to control circumstances. Instead, I turned inward, adjusting my concept of self until it aligned with my desire. When the alignment was true, the results were certain. There was no need to chase anything. The desired state came to me naturally, because I was already one with it in consciousness. One evening, as I reflected on all that had happened, I remembered the man's words. "You are the operant power." He meant that God acts through the human imagination. It is not some force outside manipulating us. It is the creative spirit within, responding to our every assumption. When you say, "I am," you are declaring the presence of that creative power. Whatever follows those two words shapes your world. If you say, "I am tired," you invite weariness. If you say, "I am strong," strength must appear. The words themselves are less important than the feeling behind them, for feeling is the true language of creation. The subconscious does not hear words, it feels states. So when you feel yourself to be something, whether good or bad, that feeling becomes the seed of your future experience. I began to use this principle deliberately. Whenever I felt doubt or lack, I would stop and quietly affirm, "I am all that I desire to be." I would then sink into that feeling until peace replaced worry. Sometimes it took moments, sometimes longer, but each time it worked. The inner shift always preceded the outer result. Gradually, I found myself living from a higher state of being, not because the world changed first, but because I changed within. My conversations, my actions, my very presence carried a new tone. I no longer sought validation, for I knew my worth came from within. And as I held that knowing, life returned it multiplied. People responded to me differently because I responded to myself differently. The greatest secret of the law of attraction is that you cannot receive what you do not first accept yourself to be. You cannot attract love while rejecting yourself. You cannot attract abundance while feeling undeserving. The law is not cruel, it is precise. It gives to you according to your concept of self. The moment you assume a higher concept, life rearranges itself to mirror it. The change may come gradually or suddenly, but it will come. This is why Neville often said, "Change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you live." That statement is not poetry, it is law, and so I began to see that imagination and identity are one. The self you imagine yourself to be is the self that expresses. You are never stuck, never bound, except by your own assumption of limitation. The power that creates galaxies lives within you as your imagination. When you dare to assume the highest version of yourself, you awaken that power. You need no permission, no proof, no sign. You only need faith in the unseen reality that imagination reveals. From that moment, you cease to be a victim of circumstances and become the master of them. For the world, in all its vastness, is but the reflection of the image you hold of yourself in the mirror of mind.